Sophia Maxwell stood at the window of her small but cozy New York apartment, gazing out at the bustling city below. It was a typical Friday evening, and the streets were alive with the sounds of people, cars, and the distant hum of the subway. But to Sophia, everything felt distant, as though she were watching life through a glass wall. At 45, she was at a crossroads in her life. The divorce from her husband of 18 years had left her feeling fractured, like a jigsaw puzzle with a few pieces missing. For the most part, she had put on a brave face, continued teaching English at the local high school, and focused on raising her 18-year-old son Ben. But deep down, there was an emptiness, a longing for something she couldn't quite name. Her friends often told her she was too young to give up on love, and that there was still plenty of time to meet someone new. But Sophia wasn't so sure. After the dissolution of her marriage, she found it hard to believe that love would come back into her life. The scars from her past were still fresh, and though her outward appearance might suggest otherwise, her dark, wavy hair, sharp eyes, and timeless beauty, her heart felt like a fragile thing. Ben, now in his final year of high school, was becoming more independent, and that left her with more time alone. She tried to fill the space with work, hobbies, and spending time with her closest friends. But the silence at the end of the day was deafening. Sophia's relationship with Ben was strong, but the distance between them was growing. She could see it in the way he spoke to her, short, clipped responses, and his increasing desire to spend time with his friends rather than at home. She knew this was natural, but it still left her feeling abandoned, even if it was just temporary. It had been months since she had even thought about dating. Her friends Claire and Sarah had tried to set her up on a few blind dates, but each one had ended in awkward silences and polite goodbyes. Dating at her age felt strange, as though she were trying on a pair of shoes that no longer fit. That night, after a long week of grading papers and managing her ever-growing to-do list, Sophia found herself scrolling through her phone, flipping through old photos from happier times. She saw her younger self, smiling brightly on vacation with her ex-husband, feeling love and promise for the future. Now, those memories felt more like ghosts than anything tangible. But maybe it was time for a change. Sophia had heard about a local yoga studio that had been getting rave reviews. At first, she dismissed the idea. Yoga? It seemed like something for younger people, the types who spent their weekends meditating in tree poses and posting photos of their avocado toast. But something about the idea of a space dedicated to peace and mindfulness sparked an idea. After a few days of thinking about it, she made up her mind. Yoga could be exactly what she needed, a way to unwind and reconnect with herself, a moment of peace in the midst of her chaotic life. And maybe, just maybe, it would help her find the strength to open up again, to heal from the past, and to move forward. The next evening, she stepped into the small yoga studio on the corner of her street. The smell of lavender and incense filled the air, and the soft sound of calming music played in the background. There was a gentle hum of conversation as a few other participants quietly gathered on their mats, adjusting the straps of their yoga pants and folding towels. She felt a little out of place, but that was nothing new. Sophia had always felt slightly disconnected from the world around her, as if she were still figuring out where she fit in. But there was something about this space, about the stillness and quiet, that gave her hope. As she set her mat down in the back of the room, she noticed the instructor approaching. His name was Ethan Rivers. He was tall, with shaggy dark hair and a presence that seemed both calming and strong. There was a softness in his smile that immediately put her at ease. He spoke with a calm voice, guiding the group through stretches and breathing exercises, helping them release the tension they carried in their bodies. Ethan's voice was soothing, but what struck Sophia the most was how effortlessly he seemed to create a sense of peace in the room. He wasn't just teaching yoga, he was teaching people to be present, to focus on the here and now. Sophia was surprised at how quickly the tension in her body began to melt away. She had expected to feel awkward and out of place, but instead, she felt like she was doing something good for herself, something that didn't require her to be perfect or in control. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to relax. At the end of the session, as everyone gathered their belongings, Ethan approached her with a warm smile. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sophia smiled back, surprised at how much she had enjoyed the class. "I think I'm going to like this," she said. "I didn't expect it to be so peaceful." Ethan nodded. "Yoga has a way of grounding you, helping you reconnect with yourself. I'm glad you came." Sophia nodded again, feeling a small, unfamiliar spark of excitement in her chest. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Not just yoga, but a chance to find herself again, to heal, and maybe, just maybe, to open her heart to something else. As she left the studio, she couldn't help but think about Ethan. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, that made her feel safe and understood. But for now, she pushed that thought to the back of her mind. She wasn't ready for anything yet. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a small glimmer of hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of yoga sessions and quiet evenings at home. Sophia quickly fell into a routine, attending yoga every Tuesday and Thursday evening after work. She'd walk into the studio, the familiar scent of lavender and incense immediately enveloping her, and the soothing melodies of gentle music wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Each session brought her a sense of peace she hadn't known she was missing. Sophia had always been a busy woman. Her life had revolved around her son Ben, her job, and maintaining the semblance of normalcy after her divorce. But yoga, for the first time in years, offered her something different, an opportunity to focus on herself. She'd been hesitant at first, feeling like the odd one out among the younger faces in the class. But over time, she grew comfortable. The studio was a place of healing, a sacred space where she could breathe deeply and find solace in the quiet moments. And as much as she hated to admit it, she found herself looking forward to the classes, looking forward to seeing Ethan Rivers again. Ethan was everything she'd never expected. Calm, composed, and patient. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound important, but not forced. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as if he understood the weight of the world but had learned how to let go of it. Sophia couldn't help but admire him, but more than that, she found herself drawn to him. It was subtle at first, just a lingering thought here and there, a fluttering feeling that surfaced when she saw him smile or when his voice calmed the chaos inside her. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something, a connection perhaps, or maybe just a quiet longing that made her realize how much she'd been missing. One evening, after a particularly calming session, as the group slowly packed their mats away, Ethan caught her eye. "You did great tonight," he said, offering a soft smile. "I noticed you're starting to really relax into the poses. Yoga's a great way to reconnect with your body and mind." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. "Thanks," she said, a little flustered. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding back in her life until yoga allowed her to let go, piece by piece. "I'm still new to it, but it's been nice. Peaceful." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at her, a warmth in his eyes. "That's the point," he said, with a hint of something deeper in his voice, though he quickly masked it. "We all carry things with us, stress, memories, emotions. Yoga helps us release them, if we're willing." Sophia nodded, a little unsure how to respond. There was something about Ethan's words that felt personal, as though he understood more than he was letting on. But then, as if sensing her hesitation, he offered her a friendly smile. "If you ever want to grab a coffee after class, let me know. Sometimes I like to stick around after, chat with the people in class. No pressure, just a thought." Sophia froze for a moment, her mind racing. Was he just being friendly, or was there something more to this? She wasn't sure. "Sure," she said, surprising herself. "I think I'd like that." And just like that, a small spark had been lit. The next Tuesday evening, after class, Ethan invited her to the small cafe around the corner from the yoga studio. They sat in a quiet corner booth, the soft hum of conversation around them blending with the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan seemed at ease, but Sophia, ever the cautious one, wasn't so sure. She wasn't ready to jump back into anything. But something about Ethan made her feel comfortable, like he understood that she needed space, and he wasn't in any hurry to rush things. "How long have you been teaching yoga?" she asked, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She had no real agenda, just trying to ease the quiet. "About 10 years now," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. "I started out as a student myself, but I fell in love with it. Yoga's not just about the body, it's about the mind too. It's a way to learn about yourself, to become more aware of what you're feeling, what you're thinking." Sophia thought about that for a moment. It was true. Yoga had made her more aware of the tightness in her shoulders, the constant clenching of her jaw, and the tension she carried with her every day. She had spent so many years focusing on everyone else, her son, her ex-husband, her students, that she had forgotten how to care for herself. "And you? What do you do when you need to unwind?" she asked, genuinely curious. Ethan smiled, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. I guess yoga is my answer too. But I also like to read. I love literature. It's one of those things that makes me feel like I can step into another world and forget about mine for a while. Sophia smiled, her own love for books resonating with his words. Me too. I'm a teacher after all, she added with a small laugh. It's hard not to love a good story. They talked for another hour, their conversation flowing easily. Ethan was funny, insightful, and surprisingly open about his own life. He mentioned his daughter, Sarah, who was in college, and how he had recently gone through a difficult divorce as well. He didn't linger on the details, but there was a quiet sadness in his voice that Sophia understood all too well. There was a shared understanding between them, a bond formed not from grand gestures, but from the quiet spaces in between their words. They weren't trying to fix each other. They were simply offering each other something they both needed, companionship, even if just for an evening. As the evening came to an end, Ethan stood up and offered her his hand, helping her out of her seat. Thanks for coming out tonight. It was nice to talk. Sophia smiled, her heart warming. It really was. I'm glad we did this. Ethan gave her a small, almost shy smile. Me too. And as they said their goodbyes, Sophia couldn't help but feel a flutter in her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, hope. For the first time in a long time, she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't as far away as she'd thought. The next few weeks passed in a gentle rhythm, like the steady flow of a river carving its way through a rocky terrain. Sophia's life, once rigid and routine, now felt slightly more fluid. Her yoga sessions with Ethan became a consistent part of her week, each one a quiet escape where she could focus entirely on herself. And then there were the after-class coffees, small but significant moments where she and Ethan would talk about everything and nothing. At first, their conversations had been light, talk of books, movies, and the weather. But slowly, the layers began to peel back, revealing deeper thoughts and feelings. It was a slow process, but each chat felt like a step forward. Ethan didn't rush, and that was exactly what Sophia needed. He was patient, and for someone who had spent most of her life rushing to meet the expectations of others, it was a breath of fresh air. One evening, after a particularly tough class where the stretches felt a little too deep and her muscles screamed in protest, Sophia lingered in the back of the studio, wiping sweat from her brow. Ethan walked over with a warm smile, his expression kind but knowing. You okay? He asked, his voice soft and genuine. Sophia sighed, dropping her head slightly, her shoulders still tense from the class. I think I pushed myself a little too hard tonight, she admitted, half laughing. My body's letting me know it. Ethan chuckled, nodding in understanding. It happens. Yoga's not about pushing your limits, it's about listening to your body. Some days are harder than others, and that's okay. We just try again next time. Sophia met his eyes, surprised at how much comfort she found in his words. It wasn't just the yoga that had helped her, though that was certainly a part of it. It was the way Ethan made her feel seen, heard, without the need for pretense. She had grown so accustomed to hiding her emotions, locking them away behind layers of professionalism and practicality. But with Ethan, it was different. She didn't feel like she had to hide. I don't know how to let go sometimes, she confessed, her voice quieter now. Not just in yoga, but in life. I've spent so long being strong for everyone else that I forgot how to be vulnerable. Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. I think we all have that problem, especially when we've been through things that make us feel like we need to guard ourselves. But being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. It's part of being human. Sophia absorbed his words, the weight of them settling into her chest. She had always seen vulnerability as something to fear, something to avoid. But Ethan's gentle assurance made her question that belief. Do you ever feel vulnerable? She asked, almost hesitantly. Ethan's expression softened. All the time, he said simply. Vulnerability is part of who we are. It's not something to hide. It's something to embrace. Sophia thought about that for a long time after the class ended, as she walked home through the quiet streets of the city. She had always thought of herself as a strong woman. Independent. Resilient. But now, she was beginning to wonder if strength could coexist with vulnerability. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that everything was fine. Maybe it was time to let go and allow herself to feel again. The next time they met for coffee, their conversation flowed easily, with Ethan talking about his recent trip to the mountains with his daughter, and Sophia sharing a funny story about one of her students. But as they sipped their coffee, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a subtle shift in their dynamic. They were no longer just two people who had met in a yoga class. There was something more, something that both of them could sense, though neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Later that week, after another yoga class, Ethan surprised Sophia with an invitation. "I'm organizing a small weekend retreat next month," he said as they gathered their things. "It's a chance to unplug, practice yoga, and do some hiking. It's just for a small group of us. I thought you might be interested." Sophia hesitated for a moment. A weekend getaway. With Ethan. Part of her wanted to say no. After all, it was still so early, and the idea of spending an entire weekend away with someone she barely knew felt intimidating. But then she remembered how much the yoga classes had helped her feel grounded, and how much Ethan had encouraged her to embrace new experiences. "That sounds nice," she said, a little unsure. "When is it?" 2 weeks from now," he replied, his eyes warm. "There's no pressure, of course. Just thought it might be a good opportunity for you to deepen your practice and maybe take a step back from everything else for a while." Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of his offer. It was more than just a yoga retreat. It was an invitation to step outside of her comfort zone, to allow herself to experience something different. "I'll think about it," she said with a smile, though in her heart, she knew she was already leaning toward saying yes. The days leading up to the retreat were filled with mixed emotions. Sophia found herself checking her calendar several times, wondering if she was making a mistake. Could she really go away for an entire weekend with Ethan and a group of strangers? But as the weekend drew closer, the sense of excitement began to overshadow her doubts. She was ready for something new. She was ready for a change. On the morning of the retreat, Sophia packed her bag carefully. She brought along her favorite yoga clothes, a few books, and a journal she had been meaning to write in. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. For the first time in a long while, she was doing something for herself. Something that wasn't about being a mother or a teacher or a friend. It was about being her, about rediscovering who she was, outside of all the roles she had played for so many years. When she arrived at the retreat, the air was fresh and crisp, the smell of pine trees filling her lungs. Ethan greeted her with a warm smile, his presence calming. The retreat center was nestled in a quiet valley, far from the noise of the city. It was peaceful, serene, a stark contrast to the chaotic pace of her daily life. As the weekend unfolded, Sophia found herself reconnecting with parts of herself she had forgotten. The yoga sessions were challenging but rewarding. The hiking gave her space to clear her mind. And the evenings spent sitting around the fire, talking with the small group of people who had joined the retreat, were filled with laughter and shared stories. By the time the weekend came to an end, Sophia realized that something inside her had shifted. She had spent so much time focusing on what had been lost that she had forgotten how to appreciate what was still there. The weekend had given her a chance to breathe, to be present, and to connect, not just with others, but with herself. And when it was time to leave, Ethan gave her one last, knowing smile. "How was it?" he asked, his voice filled with warmth. "It was exactly what I needed," Sophia said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "Thank you." Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "I'm glad you came. You deserve to take the time for yourself, Sophia." And as she walked away, Sophia realized that for the first time in a long time, she was finally starting to see the woman she was becoming, a woman who was no longer afraid to let go, to embrace the present, and maybe, just maybe, to let love back in. The morning air at the retreat was crisp, the kind of coolness that reminded you of a fresh start. After an invigorating yoga session and a light breakfast, Sophia sat on the porch of the retreat center, looking out at the sprawling valley before her. The peace of the mountains surrounded her, offering a welcome silence. It was hard to believe she had spent so many years in the frantic hustle of city life, constantly running from one thing to the next. Here, in this quiet place, she felt herself begin to breathe again. It had been 2 days since she'd arrived, and the retreat had already begun to change her. It wasn't just the yoga, though, that had stretched her body in ways she hadn't known it could be stretched. It was the space, the freedom to sit with herself, to reflect without distractions. Her conversations with the other participants had been light-hearted and full of laughter, but there was a deeper undercurrent to everything. As she sat on the porch, She felt herself reconnecting with the version of her that had been buried for so long, the woman before marriage, before motherhood, before responsibilities weighed her down. But it wasn't just the retreat that had been transformative. It was Ethan. She hadn't been sure what to expect when she agreed to come, but as the days went by, she found herself increasingly drawn to him, not just because he was a wonderful teacher, but because he had a way of making her feel seen, of making her believe that the parts of herself she had locked away for so long were still worth discovering. It wasn't love yet, but it felt like something real, something important. There were moments, like when they shared a quiet conversation by the fire, or when he caught her eye during a yoga pose, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they were both on, that made her heart flutter in ways she hadn't experienced in years. That morning, after the yoga session, they were sitting outside together, sipping tea in comfortable silence. Ethan broke it first, his voice quiet but full of intention. "You've come a long way, Sophia," he said, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. You're letting go, and that's not an easy thing to do." Sophia took a deep breath, thinking about his words. She had never been someone to easily open up, to expose her vulnerabilities. But in these few days, it felt like she was slowly peeling back the layers, revealing a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. "I think I am," she said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "It feels different, but good. I didn't realize how much I was holding on to until now." Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. It takes a lot of courage to let go of things, especially when you're not sure what comes next. Sophia met his gaze, something shifting inside her. She had spent so many years planning and controlling everything, her career, her relationships, her son's future, that the idea of letting go had always felt like a risk. But now, sitting here in the stillness of the mountains, it didn't feel like a risk at all. It felt like freedom. "I'm glad I came here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know I needed it, but now that I'm here, I can't imagine not having this time for myself." Ethan's expression softened, his eyes searching hers in a way that made her heart skip a beat. There was an intimacy in his gaze, something unspoken but powerful. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she could reach out and grasp it, if only she allowed herself. The silence between them stretched, comfortable and laden with meaning. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, they both looked at each other a moment longer than was normal, long enough for the air around them to crackle with something unspoken. It wasn't the rushing flood of love that she had once felt in her youth, but something quieter, something deeper, and maybe, just maybe, something more lasting. "I'm glad you came too," Ethan said, his voice quieter now, as if the weight of the moment had changed things for him as well. Later that day, during their afternoon hike through the mountain trails, the group walked in near silence, each person absorbed in their own thoughts. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the sun shone through the trees in long golden beams, casting shadows on the forest floor. Sophia found herself walking beside Ethan, her breath coming in steady bursts as they made their way up a gentle incline. "Do you hike often?" she asked, trying to keep her mind off the fluttering feeling that seemed to be sitting in her chest. Ethan nodded. "I try to get out here as often as I can. Nature has a way of grounding me, reminding me of what's important. It's easy to get lost in the noise of everyday life, but out here, things feel clearer." Sophia nodded, her thoughts drifting to her own life, how loud it had been at times, how cluttered with expectations and to-do lists. She hadn't realized how much of it had been noise until now. It was as if being away from everything had given her a new perspective, a new clarity about what really mattered. The path they were walking on was narrow, lined with tall trees, and every step they took felt deliberate, as though they were both choosing their way forward. It was easy to fall into step with Ethan, his pace steady and calming. And there in that moment, she couldn't help but wonder if they were both walking towards something more than just the next yoga session. As they reached a clearing, the group stopped to rest, sitting on large rocks and stretching their legs. Ethan took a seat beside Sophia, their shoulders brushing lightly. She glanced over at him, catching his eye for a brief moment, and a small smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't love yet, but it was a beginning. It was the quiet understanding between two people who had shared enough space and time to realize that something was shifting between them. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she wasn't just waiting for something to happen. She was living it, in real time, in the presence of someone who made her feel seen, who made her believe that love didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be real. As they hiked back to the retreat center, the sky turning pink and orange with the setting sun, Sophia's heart felt lighter, as though the weight of the years had been lifted, piece by piece. She wasn't sure where this journey with Ethan would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was no longer afraid to find out. The retreat was nearly over, and the once soft mountain air had turned chilly with the approaching dusk. The last 2 days had been a whirlwind of introspection, yoga, hiking, and quiet conversations by the fire. Sophia could feel a shift within herself. Something that had been dormant for years was slowly waking up, gently pushing her to reconsider the way she had been living her life. But even as she felt herself changing, she couldn't deny that she was also terrified. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to truly feel anything for someone else, since she trusted someone with her heart. The walls she had built around herself felt both comforting and confining. She was starting to realize that the fear of getting hurt had been the very thing keeping her from experiencing the kind of love she craved. That night, as the group gathered around a fire outside the retreat center, the golden light flickering in their faces, Sophia found herself seated next to Ethan again. The soft crackle of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the wind provided a soothing background to their quiet conversation. "Are you nervous to go back?" Ethan asked, his voice low and steady, as if he too was grappling with the idea of returning to the chaos of the world outside the mountains. Sophia paused, her fingers wrapped around her warm mug of tea. "Yes," she admitted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to leave this place, this peace. I feel like I've finally found a part of myself that's been missing for so long, and I'm afraid that when I go back to my normal life, it'll slip away." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious but understanding. "It's natural to feel that way. This space we've created here, it's a rare thing. But the work doesn't stop when the retreat ends. The real challenge is integrating what we've learned here into our everyday lives." Sophia looked at him, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his face. "How do you do that?" she asked quietly. "How do you keep this feeling, this peace, when everything else feels so overwhelming?" Ethan looked away for a moment, his gaze drifting to the fire as though considering her question. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but filled with something deeper, wisdom perhaps, or maybe the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having lived through difficult times. "I think it's about learning to let go," he said. "Letting go of the things that no longer serve you, the things that hold you back. The fear, the doubt, the need to control everything. It's hard, especially when we've been conditioned to think that holding on is what keeps us safe. But in truth, it's the letting go that allows us to move forward, to grow." Sophia's heart beat a little faster at his words. The idea of letting go was both liberating and terrifying. How could she possibly let go of the fear that had shaped her for so long? How could she let go of the walls she had so carefully built around her heart? "I know it's hard," Ethan continued, sensing her hesitation. "But sometimes, we have to trust that we're stronger than we think. And we have to be willing to take risks in love, in life. Because if we don't, we'll always be stuck in the past, never fully embracing the future." Sophia's thoughts swirled. Ethan's words resonated with her deeply. She had spent so many years avoiding risk, avoiding vulnerability. But now, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the warmth of the fire, she felt a small spark of courage stir inside her. "I've spent so much time trying to protect myself from getting hurt," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But maybe I've been protecting myself from something I really need: love, connection, being seen for who I really am." Ethan met her eyes, his gaze steady and warm. "That's the first step," he said gently. "Recognizing that love isn't a weakness. It's a strength. And it's worth the risk." Sophia took a deep breath, her heart feeling heavier but also lighter, as though a weight she didn't even know she was carrying had started to lift. She looked around at the group sitting around the fire, their laughter filling the air, and realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of something real and unguarded. The moment stretched between them, and for a second, it felt like the world around them had faded away. The fire, the mountain air, the sounds of the night, they all seemed distant, insignificant, as if time had slowed down. In that moment, it was just Sophia and Ethan, two people standing on the edge of something new and unknown. And then, as if the spell had broken, the others began to stir, the chatter picking up again, and the night's conversation shifted back to lighter topics. But the connection between Sophia and Ethan remained, unspoken but undeniable. The next day, as the retreat came to an end, Sophia stood on the porch of the center, looking out at the valley one last time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape. She felt an odd mixture of sadness and anticipation. Leaving the retreat felt like leaving a dream behind, but at the same time, she knew it was time to take what she had learned and bring it back into her life. Ethan approached her quietly, his presence calm as always. "I'm glad you came, Sophia," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "You've made a lot of progress. And I think you're ready for whatever comes next." Sophia turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something important. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For everything. For helping me see that it's okay to let go, to be vulnerable." Ethan gave her a small, knowing smile. "You've always had that strength, Sophia. You just had to find it." And then, before she could say anything more, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Sophia's drive back to New York was a quiet one. The familiar skyline came into view as she neared the city, but something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had left days earlier, full of uncertainty and fear. She had learned something new, about herself, about love, and about the importance of letting go. As she pulled into her parking spot and turned off the engine, she sat for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, or where her path with Ethan would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer afraid to find out. The retreat was nearly over, and the once soft mountain air had turned chilly with the approaching dusk. The last 2 days had been a whirlwind of introspection, yoga, hiking, and quiet conversations by the fire. Sophia could feel a shift within herself. Something that had been dormant for years was slowly waking up, gently pushing her to reconsider the way she had been living her life. But even as she felt herself changing, she couldn't deny that she was also terrified. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to truly feel anything for someone else, since she trusted someone with her heart. The walls she had built around herself felt both comforting and confining. She was starting to realize that the fear of getting hurt had been the very thing keeping her from experiencing the kind of love she craved. That night, as the group gathered around a fire outside the retreat center, the golden light flickering in their faces, Sophia found herself seated next to Ethan again. The soft crackle of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the wind provided a soothing background to their quiet conversation. "Are you nervous to go back?" Ethan asked, his voice low and steady, as if he too was grappling with the idea of returning to the chaos of the world outside the mountains. Sophia paused, her fingers wrapped around her warm mug of tea. "Yes," she admitted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to leave this place, this peace. I feel like I've finally found a part of myself that's been missing for so long, and I'm afraid that when I go back to my normal life, it'll slip away." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious but understanding. "It's natural to feel that way. This space we've created here, it's a rare thing. But the work doesn't stop when the retreat ends. The real challenge is integrating what we've learned here into our everyday lives." Sophia looked at him, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his face. "How do you do that?" she asked quietly. "How do you keep this feeling, this peace, when everything else feels so overwhelming?" Ethan looked away for a moment, his gaze drifting to the fire as though considering her question. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but filled with something deeper, wisdom perhaps, or maybe the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having lived through difficult times. "I think it's about learning to let go," he said. "Letting go of the things that no longer serve you, the things that hold you back. The fear, the doubt, the need to control everything. It's hard, especially when we've been conditioned to think that holding on is what keeps us safe. But in truth, it's the letting go that allows us to move forward, to grow." Sophia's heart beat a little faster at his words. The idea of letting go was both liberating and terrifying. How could she possibly let go of the fear that had shaped her for so long? How could she let go of the walls she had so carefully built around her heart? "I know it's hard," Ethan continued, sensing her hesitation. "But sometimes, we have to trust that we're stronger than we think. And we have to be willing to take risks in love, in life. Because if we don't, we'll always be stuck in the past, never fully embracing the future." Sophia's thoughts swirled. Ethan's words resonated with her deeply. She had spent so many years avoiding risk, avoiding vulnerability. But now, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the warmth of the fire, she felt a small spark of courage stir inside her. "I've spent so much time trying to protect myself from getting hurt," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But maybe I've been protecting myself from something I really need: love. Connection. Being seen for who I really am. Ethan met her eyes, his gaze steady and warm. That's the first step, he said gently. Recognizing that love isn't a weakness. It's a strength. And it's worth the risk. Sophia took a deep breath, her heart feeling heavier but also lighter, as though a weight she didn't even know she was carrying had started to lift. She looked around at the group sitting around the fire, their laughter filling the air, and realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of something real and unguarded. The moment stretched between them, and for a second, it felt like the world around them had faded away. The fire, the mountain air, the sounds of the night, they all seemed distant, insignificant, as if time had slowed down. In that moment, it was just Sophia and Ethan, two people standing on the edge of something new and unknown. And then, as if the spell had broken, the others began to stir, the chatter picking up again, and the night's conversation shifted back to lighter topics. But the connection between Sophia and Ethan remained, unspoken but undeniable. The next day, as the retreat came to an end, Sophia stood on the porch of the center, looking out at the valley one last time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape. She felt an odd mixture of sadness and anticipation. Leaving the retreat felt like leaving a dream behind, but at the same time, she knew it was time to take what she had learned and bring it back into her life. Ethan approached her quietly, his presence calm as always. "I'm glad you came, Sophia," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "You've made a lot of progress. And I think you're ready for whatever comes next." Sophia turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something important. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For everything. For helping me see that it's okay to let go, to be vulnerable." Ethan gave her a small, knowing smile. "You've always had that strength, Sophia. You just had to find it." And then, before she could say anything more, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Sophia's drive back to New York was a quiet one. The familiar skyline came into view as she neared the city, but something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had left days earlier, full of uncertainty and fear. She had learned something new, about herself, about love, and about the importance of letting go. As she pulled into her parking spot and turned off the engine, she sat for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, or where her path with Ethan would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer afraid to find out. Back in New York, the bustle of the city quickly reclaimed Sophia's attention. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt too small, too quiet. The city's frenetic energy, the constant noise of traffic and voices, seemed to reverberate inside her like an echo. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, she had been standing on a mountain, surrounded by nothing but the peace of nature, breathing in the fresh air and letting go of the past. But that was the thing about change: it never happened all at once. The retreat had been transformative, yes, but now she was faced with the real challenge: how to bring the peace she'd found back into her everyday life. She had learned how to let go of the weight she had been carrying for years, but how could she hold on to that feeling when she was back in the midst of the noise? Sophia found herself standing in her living room late one evening, staring out the window at the city below. The view was stunning, the skyline glittering with lights, the streets alive with people going about their busy lives. But as she looked at it, she felt something stir inside her, a longing for something more. Something different. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was a message from Ethan. "Hey, Sophia. I hope you made it home safely. I just wanted to say thank you again for being part of the retreat. It was great getting to know you. I'll be teaching a class this Thursday at 7 p.m. if you're interested. Hope to see you again soon. Ethan." She stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. Her heart fluttered. It wasn't just about the yoga anymore. It was about Ethan. She had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that the retreat had been a one-time experience, something she could look back on fondly without expecting more. But the truth was, every time she thought about him, her chest tightened, her thoughts scattered. She was drawn to him, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure what to do with it. She took a deep breath and typed back a reply. "I'd love to come. I've missed the class, and the peace that comes with it. I'll see you Thursday." It was a small step, but it felt like the right one. She wasn't sure what would happen when she saw Ethan again. But she knew she couldn't keep avoiding the connection between them, pretending it didn't exist. She was ready to see where it could go, even if that meant facing the vulnerability she had been so afraid of for so long. Thursday evening arrived, and Sophia found herself standing outside the yoga studio once again, her heart racing. She hadn't expected to feel this nervous. She had been to the studio countless times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, it felt like more than just yoga. It felt like a chance to reconnect, with herself and with Ethan. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and incense greeted her, and the soft hum of music filled the air. The room was quieter than usual, the space already set up for the class. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her as she unrolled her mat. She was here. She was present. And then she saw him. Ethan stood at the front of the room, preparing for the class, his back to her. He was focused, as always, but there was something in the way he moved, something that made her heart skip a beat. He turned, and their eyes met across the room. There was a quiet understanding between them, something unspoken but powerful. The spark she had felt before was still there, flickering gently in her chest. "Hey," Ethan greeted, his voice warm as he made his way over to her. "I'm glad you made it." Sophia smiled, feeling a rush of warmth at the sight of him. "I'm glad to be here," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "It's been a while." Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad you came back. I know things are different outside of this space, but I hope you're finding a way to carry some of the peace with you." Sophia hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I'm trying," she said finally. "It's harder than I thought, though." Ethan's gaze softened, his voice low and steady. "It's always hard at first. Change doesn't happen overnight. But it's worth the effort." Sophia nodded, her mind racing with questions. She had spent so much time protecting herself, building walls to keep herself safe from the pain of the past. But now, she was beginning to wonder if those walls were keeping her from the very thing she wanted most, connection. And she wasn't sure if she was ready to let those walls come down. The class began, and they moved through the poses, breathing deeply, stretching and strengthening their bodies. But as the class progressed, Sophia couldn't help but notice how much more aware she was of Ethan's presence. The way he moved, the way his voice guided them through each breath, it was all so calming, yet electric at the same time. She could feel the pull between them, undeniable and unspoken, but still there, lingering in the air. At the end of the class, when everyone was lying in Savasana, Sophia closed her eyes and allowed herself to drift into the quiet. She could hear Ethan's voice softly guiding them through the final moments of the practice, and for a moment, everything felt still. Everything felt right. But as the class ended and the lights came up, the reality of the world outside the yoga studio came rushing back. Sophia sat up slowly, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront the feelings she had for Ethan, wasn't sure if she was prepared to open herself up to the possibility of something more. She had spent so long guarding her heart. What would it mean to take that risk again? Ethan came over to her as the class filtered out, his presence filling the space between them. "I'm glad you came back," he said again, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. "You seem to really find your rhythm tonight." Sophia looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this moment, this decision, was important. She could feel the walls she had spent so long building beginning to crumble, piece by piece. "I'm glad I came back too," she said, her voice steady but filled with something deeper. "I think I'm ready to stop holding back. I just need to figure out how." Ethan's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to take the first step." Sophia nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, with Ethan standing before her, she knew she was ready to take that step. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her past begin to lift. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to do this by herself. The days after the cafe gathering passed in a blur of introspection. Sophia's mind was filled with thoughts of Ethan, the conversations they had shared, the unspoken connection that seemed to grow stronger with every encounter. She had spent years shielding herself from the possibility of love, but now with each passing day, the idea of embracing something real and unguarded felt less frightening. Sophia had learned a lot during the retreat, but it was in the quiet moments of her life afterward that the real work began. The retreat had been a space for healing, but the true challenge was in applying those lessons to her everyday life. Her life in New York was full of the noise and distraction that came with a busy job and a teenager in the house. It was easy to slip back into old habits: busy work, endless to-do lists, and the constant hum of worry that had defined her life for so long. But she was different now. She could feel it. Slowly but surely, she was allowing herself to let go of the need to control everything. She was allowing herself to feel, to trust, and most importantly, to be vulnerable. It was a Thursday evening when Sophia walked into the yoga studio again, a familiar sense of peace washing over her as she entered. The room was warm, the soft glow of the lights casting a gentle, calming atmosphere. Ethan was setting up at the front, his movements graceful and deliberate, and as soon as he saw her, a smile spread across his face. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice warm and genuine. "I'm glad you made it." Sophia smiled back, her heart fluttering just a little. She hadn't been to class in a week, work and life had gotten in the way, but she had missed it. She had missed him. "I'm happy to be here," she said, walking over to set up her mat. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the excitement she felt about being there was hard to hide. Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment, a softness in his expression that made her heart skip. "I've missed seeing you here," he said, his voice low, almost as though he were sharing a secret. Sophia felt the warmth of his words settle in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that she was no longer afraid. She was no longer afraid of what might happen, or of opening herself up to something new. She was ready. The class that night felt different. Every movement, every breath, seemed to carry more meaning. Sophia found herself not just going through the motions but actually feeling each stretch, each pose, each breath as a way to connect with herself in a deeper way. When the class ended, she felt more present than she had in years. As the others gathered their things and left, Ethan stayed behind to chat with a few students. When the room had cleared, he walked over to Sophia, who was still packing up her mat. "How did you feel tonight?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity and care. Sophia looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I feel different," she said slowly. "Like I'm finally listening to myself. I've been so caught up in my head, in everything that I thought I needed to do, that I've forgotten how to just be." Ethan nodded, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're getting there. Sometimes the hardest part is letting go of the need to be perfect, to always have everything under control. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust the process." Sophia thought about that, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. She had spent so much of her life striving for perfection, trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect teacher, the perfect woman. But now, she was beginning to understand that perfection was an illusion. The only thing that mattered was being real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally allowing herself to be. The following weekend, Ben left for a trip with his friends. As she walked through the quiet apartment, Sophia felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. The space was hers again, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She didn't feel like she had to be everything for everyone. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Ethan. "Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to get together this weekend. Maybe grab a coffee or a bite to eat. Let me know." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. It was casual, simple, but the excitement she felt was undeniable. She hadn't realized how much she had missed spending time with him, how much she had been looking forward to the possibility of something more. She quickly typed a reply. "I'd love that. How about Saturday afternoon?" "Sounds perfect. I'll pick you up at 1. Sophia smiled, her chest filled with anticipation. "I'll see you then." Saturday arrived, and as Sophia got ready for her date with Ethan, she found herself feeling a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. She chose a simple outfit, something that made her feel both comfortable and confident, and took a little extra time with her hair and makeup. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, there was an ease between them, like they had known each other for much longer than they actually had. They drove to a cafe near the river, a place that was quiet and quaint, perfect for a casual afternoon. They sat outside, the sun warm on their faces, and talked about everything and nothing. There were no grand declarations, no overwhelming emotions, just two people connecting, learning about each other, sharing stories. At one point, as they sat sipping their coffee, Ethan looked at her with a soft, thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I think you're someone who's been looking for peace for a long time. But you're also someone who deserves love, real love. And I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what." Sophia's heart fluttered at his words, the sincerity in his voice making her feel more vulnerable than she'd ever felt. She had spent so long building walls to protect herself, to shield her heart from the possibility of pain. But now, sitting here with Ethan, she realized that love wasn't something to fear. It wasn't something to guard against. Love was the thing that would make her whole. "I'm ready for that," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm ready for something real." Ethan's smile softened, and for the first time in a long time, Sophia allowed herself to truly believe in the possibility of love. As they left the cafe, walking side by side along the river, Sophia felt something shift deep within her. This wasn't just a new chapter in her life, it was a new beginning. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that yoga studio weeks ago, fearful and uncertain. She was someone who had learned to trust herself, to let go, and to embrace the possibility of love. And as she walked beside Ethan, with the warm afternoon sun on her face and her heart open to the future, Sophia realized that for the first time in years, she was exactly where she was meant to be.